Yeah, I think all the same things apply, right? And, there's a transition I think people make in how they think about the interactions with the computer when they're interacting with, a generative AI-based system, whether that's a traditional one or a agentic one or what have you. And I think that is thinking it as a bit more like, again, like a colleague, right? It's just some system with all these kind of powers and abilities and knowledge, right? But it's not a foolproof thing, yeah? And yeah, just like your human colleagues or what have you, you have some issue that you want to solve.
Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Trend Detection Podcast. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, James Loach, who's head of research for Senseye Predictive Maintenance. And James has been on a few times before. We've of course talked about some really interesting but also technical subjects, but this one is really, really exciting and potentially a really exciting development in the world of predictive maintenance as well. I'm sure it's a term you've heard around agentic AI, and we're going to talk about how it relates to predictive maintenance. So I guess before we go into it, for those who don't know James, maybe just a quick line from you in terms of the work you and the team do within the Senseye team would be great.
Yeah, hi Niall. Very, very happy to be here. And yeah, in terms of a brief introduction, so I'm head of research at Senseye and have been since the early days of the company. And during that time, myself and my group have been basically responsible for the algorithms that underpin the product. And then algorithm, related functionality in the user interface and so forth. Okay.
Fantastic. So again, I mean, let's dive straight in, and I guess we should set the scene first of all and start with the basics. So a lot of people won't be aware of this term agentic AI, or they might have heard about it but don't know how it relates to them. So maybe you could just start by giving us sort of a brief explanation of what agentic AI is and how does it differ from traditional AI in an industrial context? Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think the best way to think about it is in terms of the sort of the user experience of this. So an agentic AI system relates to you some way in the way that a colleague or a worker would. Okay. So it's an entity that has some general knowledge of the world, has some knowledge of your particular use case or your particular setup, and importantly has the ability to do actions of different types, everything from looking up information to perhaps interacting with the physical world, and the ability to go off and do sort of delegated tasks for you. So this is a sense in which it's like a worker. It's a system that you can specify roughly what you want it to do. You can expect it to go away and approach that task with common sense, doing a series of actions, figuring out what you wanted it to do, and then coming back to you when it's done or it needs your help. So it's that sort of experience. And you asked how it differs from traditional AI. So, I mean, traditional AI is, I guess, a sort of an interesting term in itself, right? What we should take that to mean. But perhaps the best thing to do is to contrast it with a simple chatbot, which obviously people have plenty of experience with now. So, a simple chatbot can be agentic, in a very sort of simple way, right? So, I mean, typically when you talk to a chatbot, it's just a thing that knows some stuff, and you ask it some questions, you get some answers, something like that. And it may have the ability inside it to do some simple things like do some information lookup for you, right? Or maybe delegate you to another chatbot or move you to some bit of the app, something like that. Okay. So we might call that traditional, like a sort of example of traditional AI, in an interactive way. Now, the agentic version of that is just something much deeper, right? So it's not something that you're just doing a little Q&A with to get some info. It's something, you're specifying a task to it and you're letting it get on with it, right? Maybe it comes back to you in an hour with its reports or what have you, right? Yeah. So it's a similar kind of thing, I guess, but just deeper, right? And more sophisticated.
Yeah, and when we think about something like generative AI as well, what what is sort of agentic AI in relation to that? Is it sort of the next sort of step along, in terms of technology breakthrough? Is that the best way to describe it, or are they sort of sat alongside each other?
Yeah, I mean, generative AI to me is like underlying technology, So in the context of the things we're just talking about, so the most important generative AI technology there would be a language model, okay, which is something that really just can continue text for you. Okay, it has some model of all the text on the internet and so forth, and given some prompt, it can continue that, right? So that's like sort of an underlying thing. And that just continuation of text is something that can be turned into a chatbot, right? Because instead of continuing text, just like in paragraphs or whatever, the thing can be formed into something that's completing like a movie script, and you, the user, is playing one part and it's, completing by filling in the next part as a helpful assistant, So you have this text model that can be used to create this sort of Q&A back and forth. Right, and then you sort of build on top of that, right? So instead of just doing this Q&A prompted, you can allow the model to use tools. So instead of sending a message to you, it can send a message to some computer system to retrieve some information or do something like that. Okay, so the simple back and forth is a simple chatbot. You give it a little lookup tool, it becomes a slightly more sophisticated chatbot. And yeah, you just make it more sophisticated, right? So you fine-tune these models to do extended tasks, right, and maintain coherence over extended periods of time, right? You have them reason in the background about things. You give them dozens of different tools to use. You give them a sort of memory that they can manage, and it all sort of builds up, right? So generative AI to me is it's either like an umbrella term, or it's a description of the fundamental technology. And then these systems that we're talking about today are just things that you sort of build with that technology, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And so if we're taking that, that wonderful description you just gave and apply it to predictive maintenance, so how does agentic AI enhance or predictive maintenance solutions like Senseye, for example?
I think the best way to think about this actually sort of harks back to to Senseye before the generative AI days, right? Because it's sort of an image that we've had of the product in a way that we've structured it that still applies and is sort of made a lot more real and powerful by agentic AI. Okay, and that thing is basically thinking about the Senseye application as something like a colleague. Okay, it's a system that sits there and has this ability to look at all the data at once that's coming in from all your assets. That makes it quite an unusual colleague, right? And then in its traditional days, it's got some ability to reason over that using traditional machine learning, so forth, and tell you when it thinks there might be a problem and explain what's happening, right? So it's a system now. It's got access to all this data. It can look at it. It can tell you when there's something up and help you decide what to do as a sort of a decision support system. So Senseye's always sort of been that, right? What generative AI in general and this agentic AI specifically does is it sort of in some way changes the characteristics of that colleague that Senseye is, right? In that it makes it a lot smarter than it was. It brings general knowledge and common sense to bear. And then via the tools that we were just talking about, the ability to pull in information from different places, to synthesize information, and really just to give you to do its tasks much better, right? So to be more accurate and more precise in telling you when there's something that might be wrong, giving you much richer and more detailed and again more precise explanations of what that could be, right? Using information from the sensor already has, right? Okay, and coupling that in with documentation and so forth. And then in the interactive part of the application, when you're trying to dig into something to figure it out and work out what to do, you just have a much more powerful system at your disposal, right? So yeah, again, something that can browse across the data, across the documentation, ultimately something that can do web searches and what have you, and just bring all that stuff into one place. Okay, so Senseye is like this kind of strange maintenance colleague that you sort of work with as part of your team. All of these systems just make it a much better colleague, like a much more useful one, a much smarter one. Yeah.
It's interesting, James, what you say about sort of before generative AI. If there was a time, it feels like it's been around forever. so much talk around it, but it is interesting that because it's a really good point to make. Senseye was, even before Gen AI, before Agentic AI was already demonstrating big success and stuff. So I guess this is about taking it a step further in terms of those like new efficiencies and make people work more, or helping people to work more efficient. I guess it's just taking that a step further with new technology, right?
Yeah, and it's a very strange thing. I mean, I've not really gone into it on this call, but people discuss a lot about what agents actually are and the technical definitions of these things. But there is a way of looking at the Senseye application before generative AI long ago and saying it is an agentic application, because it's a system that you hand off a task to of monitoring stuff and getting back to you when it's got some problem, right? And it can do that task and in a sense act as an agent, without any generative AI in it, right? And this is a nice thing. This is just the way that we sort of form the product. It's in some sense it's by accident that these technologies have just come along, right? But they just slot in very, very nicely, right? You've got the system doing a task in a somewhat traditional machine learning way, and you just have the ability very naturally to inject this kind of intelligence and fantastic power into it, and just have it just do its job better, right? Within the same general form, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And I guess because you mentioned already a few, I guess outside of industrial environment, examples of how agents might, help to make sort of tasks more efficient. But if we talk about in a maintenance environment specifically, could you give an example of sort of where this might apply, where you could apply the AI agent?
Yeah, so you can think of it and different levels, right? So to begin with, you might think about it doing more sophisticated information lookup and synthesis of information, right? To help with standard application tasks like spotting problems, explaining what might be wrong, and so forth, right? You can so you can think of it in terms of the sort of things the product has already done, like that. In terms of exploratory things, which Agentic AI really does excel at. I mean, we have this basic task of trying to figure out what's going on, right? So maybe the system has raised some alerts, given you some possible explanations and things, and back that up, right? And then maybe you want to ask some questions of the documentation or something to decide whether to go and do an investigation or what have you. When you go and do an investigation, you take some photos or something like this. You can imagine uploading those into the system. The system then takes into account what it's seen, right? Goes off and just generally does that in a more sophisticated way. Okay, so it's sort of like debugging problems kind of thing. But you can also imagine a little bit more broadly. You can give these systems, very general and sort of user, very, very general tasks just coming from the user's needs or interests that we've not built into the app in terms of structures, right? So one of those examples is like optimizing your maintenance strategy, right? Maybe you're monitoring 1,000 robots, you have all these maintenance events in the Senseye app, all this data, all these things happening. There's just a lot of stuff, right? But you can have an agentic system. You can give it that general task. You can give it access to all of that information. Yeah, and you can just have it browse around, think about it, reason, come up with some hypotheses about how you might improve things, go and follow up on those hypotheses, and in the background, can compile you some report, right? So that would be an example of things where that's in some sense not the core purpose of the app, but the application has all this information there. And if you think, I wonder how I could schedule my oil checks on my robots a little bit better. Is there anything you could help me with there? You can go off for an hour using all our data and come back with some, very, very detailed, sophisticated analysis, ultimately of how to address that, right? Further down the line, there are things that you can do. So, for example, you can imagine using this kind of systems to help configure the application, right? So you just got some robot with some sensor on it, and you just want to set it up and get some good results. And maybe rather than talk to somebody at Senseye, you can have the system there again go off and dig into this, right? Can understand the analytics, have the ability to configure settings and things, look at historical data, look at your maintenance records, and say, okay, I think this is a good setup, right? What do you think of this? And then actually apply those things in the app. Yeah. And also down the line, once people have more trust in these systems, you can imagine them doing more like actual kind of like actions to do with the physical world, right? So raising maintenance orders, right? Filling them in with the suggestions, and sending them into an external system, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I guess trust is even putting agentic AI to the side, even with a predictive maintenance, trust is at the forefront. Do you think it would be harder to build trust in sort of agentic AI agents, or does it just become part of the natural workflow like generative AI is now, as it were, in all forms of life?
Yeah, I think all the same things apply, right? And there's a transition I think people make in how they think about the interactions with the computer when they're interacting with a generative AI based system, whether that's a traditional one or a agentic one or what have you. And I think that is thinking it as a bit more like again like a colleague, right? It's just some system with all these kind of powers and abilities and knowledge, right? But it's not a foolproof thing. Yeah. And just like your human colleagues or what have you, you have some issue that you want to solve. You might go to someone who you think knows about that. You listen to what they say and you put some value on it, right? But you don't treat it as gospel, right? Even experts in any area make mistakes and what have you, right? But you go to somebody who has a relevant knowledge, you listen, you understand, and you choose how to act based on that. And I think that's a sensible way to interact with any generative AI system, ChatGPT or all the way to the things that we have on our app, right? It's fundamentally an advisory system, but one with great power and intelligence. And basically, like at the moment, you make some suggestions. You very clearly say this is just to support you or to help you, and then you give reference information to support that, and you let the user understand to make their decision. And I think you just follow a curve over time. When these systems just become naturally better, right? You have better models and implemented in better ways. People learn more about them, become more comfortable with them, and just offload more onto them. Okay. And it's just a curve that I think will just be followed every time all over the place. But it's a smooth curve, right? There's no point where these systems, in a sense, become completely reliable, right? Or what I mean? You should go from ignoring it to doing exactly what it says, right? It's just a smooth transition.
No, exactly. There's back and forth, and there's successes and things that don't work. But like I say, nothing's perfect, right? And it's interesting what you say. It's something we emphasise at Senseye, isn't it? That about decision support. It's about pointing people to a problem that the human still needs to investigate. But it's interesting because we've talked about this. Senseye's like I've heard it before, like a reliability, a virtual reliability engineer on your team. So we certainly talk about today, this is to help augment a team, because obviously that's that said line about AI taking jobs and all this kind of thing. But we really are just talking about making team maintenance teams more efficient, basically.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's been our experience, I think, with Senseye, that maintenance teams have adopted it and have found themselves being able to do more, right? To monitor more machines, monitor machines more precisely, and to repair machines at better times, right? And ultimately to, sort of save money through, less unplanned downtime and things like that, right? So and I often think about it like that. You have a team, you bring in Senseye, it supplements them, and it helps them make a bigger contribution to the organization, right? Rather than, replacing people. Okay. And I think that, AI in general, these systems we're talking about today, in the short term, I think they just follow this path, right? Okay. It's just, more sophisticated colleagues, right? And it's interesting with maintenance. Maintenance people, have a lot of on the ground knowledge of what's happening, right? They're in the factory. They know the actual machines, they can hear them, and they're the people who are actually going to those machines and, maybe removing components or all of this kind of stuff, I mean, there's big chunks of the jobs of maintenance engineers which are not going to be replaced by AI anytime soon, right? It's the jobs of knowledge workers like me and you. I think are more at risk ultimately than maintenance engineers. But AI for in a maintenance shop, it has the ability to improve productivity a lot and help those people to make much more of a contribution, right? And then down the line, obviously AI is going to cause large scale changes to employment and society and things like that. But that is a slightly longer term thing, and maintenance engineers may be more protected from that than most people.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of skill, a lot of skills you can't simply replace, right? So that's what we're talking about here. I guess another thing with AI agents, we talked about it in a predictive maintenance context, but of course, as the technology develops within, within our customers and other organizations, they'll be developing their own agentic AI capabilities. So again, at that point, it comes about how our AI agents talk to their AI agents. So what sort of challenges around that, James, or opportunities as well, of course?
Yeah, I mean, I've presented agents so far as being something that's to do with depth, right? So the ability of a self-contained system to go off, use tools, dig into things, and accomplish these sort of broad tasks. But there are other ways of thinking about it, and I think which is quite salient to people is, as you said, thinking about the interactions of agents, right? So when your agent is doing its stuff and it's like calling a tool to look up some information or something, it can just as easily, send a natural language query to an agent on somebody else's system, asking that agent if it has anything to add to the thing at hand, right? So you can imagine, maybe there is some system which is handling or modeling your processes or helping control the processes that are going on your machines. And you have Senseye, which is thinking about maintenance, but both of these systems are ultimately to do with machines, right? And you can think of agents which are connected to both of those systems, being able to do interesting tasks, looking up information from their own data sources and so forth. And you can imagine them hooking into each other's data sources in traditional ways, like by calling their APIs, right? But an agent-to-agent interaction, is potentially very cool and much more flexible than like this kind of API things, right? The Senseye agent can completely understand the Senseye product and everything that's in it that's connected up. Likewise, your process one. And if there's a process issue, that system can, very easily talk to the Senseye one in principle, to ask questions about whether there's anything there that relates to this or might help, understand what's going on. And then vice versa. Yeah. So these kind of systems. So instead of using tools to just like call an API, to do a computational task, you have tools which are like, sending messages in a conversational way between different agents, right? So you can set up these systems in kind of toy ways quite easily, and there's certainly some kind of extreme magic to it, right? Which I think is why it's quite salient to people, to have two computer systems there chatting with each other, trying to work out what you want as the user and how they can help you, satisfy that want. It's very, very cool, right? Okay, so again, this is a thing where this technology sort of exists, right? And there are nice technical ways for handling this. There are nice protocols, right? Which help, for example, the Senseye agent understand in this world that it operates what other tools or agents are available to it that it can talk to and how to interact with them. Okay, so this is it's just a cool thing, right? But if you think about it in real products, right, what you have to do to make this work is, firstly, you just need to have good agents, right? So ones that can do these long sequences of tasks and get lots of information and not be confused. Then you have to have products that where working together really makes sense. Where they really have complementary information. And you also want systems where it makes sense to have this very general, like, natural language conversation, right? Okay, and once you have that sort of setup, you can create these things. In terms of technical issues, and understanding the relationship between entities in these different systems is important. Okay, so how does Senseye, which is working on a particular asset, thinking about a particular asset with a particular ID, communicate to some external system what asset is talking about, right? That system might have other internal representations. Okay, so you have these different systems. They need to know what assets are what, right? So that they can communicate to each other effectively what they're talking about. And then you also have issues to do with security, authentication and data access and so forth, right? So that one system firing off questions to the other system, it needs one way or another to communicate who its user is, what that user is allowed to know, and that authentication is passed to this external system, so that external system knows what it is allowed to reply, right? Okay, so to prevent data leakage and so forth. But yeah, it's one of those things. It's just a question of finding use cases that really make sense. Yeah, implementing things sensibly with good models, and making sure that you handle these authentication and entity matching sort of problems in sensible ways.
Yeah.
Right. And this is just really being worked out at the moment, right? The best way, particularly those last items I mentioned, are the best way to approach those problems. But if you look further down the road, yeah, you can very easily imagine a customer having their AI, right? And it is like the entry point to their system. And that's what users experience in the first case, right? And then Senseye becomes some sort of system that sits behind that it can communicate with, right? Okay, and can maybe do some back and forth about what's going on, or that central system can hand you off to Senseye, right, directly, and then eventually take you into the Senseye application. This kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense as well. I guess another aspect you mentioned it, just briefly then, James, is around sort of data. And how does that fit in? We know it's a key component of successful predictive maintenance deployments, but in this context of agentic AI, how does the data we collect to enable predictive maintenance, how does that fit together with this new technology?
Yeah, I think you just have to be able to access the data. You have to have relevant information. And in Senseye, this is all this time series data that we collect, all the observations we make from that with traditional machine learning, maintenance records and supplementary information like manuals, user interactions, all this kind of stuff, right? So you have to have some useful body of data that these systems can use, obviously, to do something useful along with their general knowledge. And then you just need to organize that in a way in which these systems can consume. And when you're thinking about like a traditional chatbot, very often you would think of just collecting some of that information and just kind of putting it in the chatbot in the background. Then when you talk to it, you'd just be talking about what it knows. And in an agentic system, you typically want to put that data behind tools, right? So, for example, if the system wants to know about work history on a particular asset, or what alerts have been raised, or it wants to do a lookup in some documents, they need to be represented as tools that it can use, and specify what it wants, and then get some result back in a form that it can understand. So I mean that's some work that has been going on in Senseye really since the beginning of this generative AI period. We've always had the right kind of data. Yeah, what we've been doing, in that thread is organizing this into ways which get more compatible with language models that they can understand and reason over. And need access using tools.
So that's and that's basically the continued journey, isn't it? So you're now applying that to these to agentic AI technology, right? That's and extending it out to that.
Yeah, it's building at this for its repertoire of tools. Yeah, and then getting involved with the right models, with the right tasks. Yeah, and but building this sort of deep functionality, and then with the agent to agent thing, similarly, right? Understanding how to build these correct interfaces with outside agents that can be used like tools.
And I guess as we come towards the end of our discussion, it's been really interesting to learn more about this. This is what I get out of a lot of these podcasts. I learn a lot too, and I know being in its infancy, I guess it's very difficult to look too far ahead, James. But I know you're a visionary of sorts, so I'm sure you have an opinion on where you see things going with agentic AI and predictive maintenance over the next few years, and what people should maybe expect to see in their day-to-day working life, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's just about two things, which is just much greater depth and autonomy. And better integration between people's predictive maintenance system and their other systems that have relevant information. I think people can imagine really very sort of deep and sophisticated output from these systems, in terms of fixed sort of output, like explaining, here's a potential problem, blah, 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 blah. And then when you're interacting with the system, I think it's going to this is going to feel a lot more intelligent, right, in sort of real time in front of you. So I'm hoping, in Senseye, you'll be able to sort of see this going on, right? You've asked the system something, and you'll be able to see it very quickly, pulling in all the different data, doing analysis of different kinds, cross-referencing, forming hypothesis, right? And then coming back to you with its output. Right. So it should just be just deeper and more sophisticated like that. And over the kind of time period that you're talking about, I can imagine, in interactions with the outside world happening, and being reliable. So the ability to sort of managing work orders and things like this. I don't know if that's a bit of visionary. Picture things, right? But I think it just, you can see, like, if you have access to the very fancy models or in a research setting, you can just see these very magical things when systems are doing this. You give them the right information, right direction, and the freedom to pursue over these periods of time. And they really do magical things. So this in my head is what I would want to bring into our product. And
so maybe we should clip that bit and then come back to it later and see if it came to fruition. But I guess just one final note. I always do this. I always say there's one final question, then ask another final question. But in terms of you personally, James, now you've been such a big driving force behind our generative AI and now agentic AI. Could you sort of put into words sort of your excitement around this space and its potential? And then not just within industrial environments, but beyond that as well.
Yeah, I just think it's just a world-changing technology, and it's been very interesting to see over the past few years, how people's sort of expectations in terms of its capabilities have just sort of been met and generally exceeded. Right, there's no feeling that the progress will slow or is slowing down. Okay, and there's some long process in which these things get pushed out into products and into wider society, right? But I really think this is an absolutely world-changing technological moment that we're in, and it's just it's sort of exciting to sort of be part of that, to see what's happening now, what's obviously going to come down the line, and to speculate about what's coming sort of after that. And somehow be part of it, right? But I think it's generally just a very positive thing. I mean, these sort of technologies can cause social disruptions of all different kinds, but ultimately these are things that should lead into, human beings as a whole being an awful lot more efficient and productive, which should produce a lot of economic growth and hopefully ends up producing much more affluent and comfortable world for everyone, right? But it's just a very interesting historical moment, and interesting to be part of it in a small way, using the technology and what have you.
No, exactly. No, it is very exciting, and of course on this podcast and elsewhere we'll continue to sort of follow this journey. It's amazing to see what how far the app's come, even in my 4 years, if I say at Senseye, now Siemens as well. So we look forward to seeing what's coming next. But for today, James, it's been really great to chat with you again. Thank you for sharing your insights on this topic. I'm sure we'll check in again on it as it develops within the context of Senseye. But for today, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to everyone listening wherever you are, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels, and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.